Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Firas Patel. We say Jazakallah to you, the viewer, for staying with us. Of course, one of the big stories for this week is the G20 summit that is happening in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for a new era of principled multilateralism and respect for international law in an address at that summit. Now, of course, this requires a renewed commitment to the UN Charter, according to Ramaphosa. And he said this to a working group on the reforms of global governance institutions. Joining us now to talk about South Africa, of course, taking over the presidency earlier on today, President Lula da Silva handed over the presidency to President Cyril Ramaphosa, and of course the G20 summit, which will be happening next year in South Africa. To have this discussion, I'd like to welcome Dr. Sizo Nkala, who is a senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Nkala, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus.
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening to your viewers.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Dr. Nkala, I think one of the standout points of yesterday's address, before we talk about South Africa taking over the G20 presidency, has been food security. And of course, South Africa has, of course, led the charge in trying to eliminate hunger within the continent. In his speech yesterday, do you feel that the world leaders really took, the message seriously? Not the person, but the message seriously, because world hunger continues to rise. And from a political perspective, the West, there really isn't much, I won't say goodwill, but much supposed push for world hunger to be completely eliminated.
Well, I think Brazil hit the right notes in their emphasis on world hunger, coming up with the global alliance to fight hunger and poverty. I think it's a global South problem, really, because it has been the developing countries that have been affected by rising global food inflation. Developing countries have been victims of food inflation and energy inflation, which has led, I think, hundreds of millions of people in developing countries into food insecurity and a lack of appropriate nutrition. And these things, problems like these, can easily translate or metamorphose into political crisis and social instability. If people cannot afford the basics, that's a threat to social and political stability. So I think Brazil really hit the right note, and the emphasis on tackling hunger and poverty is relevant and it's urgent. So I think it's a message that is well received.
In Ramaphosa's speech yesterday, I think he keeps on talking about multilateralism, unipolar world, and of course the discussion comes about whether the West is really ready to accept a unipolarity within global politics, and especially now when you've got a rise in, of course, right-wing parties coming within Europe and the United States of America, who is seen as the big daddy within world politics, now has Donald Trump. Will the West actually accept unipolarity? Will they accept multilateralism, given that back-to-back years the G20 has been hosted within the global South?
That's an excellent question. I think for some time now, we have seen an erosion of multilateralism because I think the West feels disadvantaged by playing in multilateral platforms. So there has been an erosion of the powers of multilateral institutions like your United Nations Security Council, your World Health Organization, World Bank, and the IMF. So that has led to problems, I think, because most of the global challenges or problems that we face today, climate change, for instance, poverty and insecurity, can only be effectively addressed through multilateral institutions. But the West, the right-wing parties in Europe and in North America as well, they've been chipping away at it, multilateralism. When Donald Trump got into the White House in his first term, he withdrew from the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which was a huge blow to global efforts to address climate change. And at the height of COVID-19 in 2020, he was threatening to defund the World Health Organization and withdraw the United States participation from the organization. And then we can see as well in the Security Council now, its failure to address security crises in Palestine and in Ukraine as well. All because the major powers do not see eye to eye in terms of tackling these problems. So I don't think the West will commit to maintaining and strengthening multilateral institutions. I think they feel disadvantaged. That's why they end up establishing these minilateral institutions like the G7, yes, for example. And then, of course, your question on multipolarity, the West, it seems they seem to be struggling to appreciate that there has been a change in global economics and in politics. Global economic power has shifted to the East. There are now, that has resulted in the emergence of multiple centers of power. So power is no longer concentrated in the West. It's distributed across the world, in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia as well. So the West seem to have difficulties to appreciate that they have lost the leverage and the advantages they enjoyed earlier on in the 20th century.
Dr. Nkala, I want to touch on a topic that has been coming up with regards to the taxation of the wealthy, the 2% tax that has been proposed. Obviously, America, and we keep speaking of America leading the way, but it always seems the case that they go ahead and they lead the way with regards to big decision making on taxing the rich. That 2% proposal. Many countries within the global south are looking at it and said, well, it has to happen. But of course, with Donald Trump being within the capitalist nature that he has, there's also going to be a sense of, well, we're not really willing to touch that supposed topic of the taxing of the wealth. Let's leave it for another time. And again, we're going into another year where the wealthy aren't really paying their dues towards society as a whole.
Well, I think it's a noble venture. Taxing the rich, adopting progressive tax policies to redistribute wealth to the poor and vulnerable. It's a noble policy, but I don't think it will succeed. The Donald Trump, who is taking power in next January in the United States, campaigned on exempting the rich from taxes. So I don't see him accepting this proposal from Brazil. I really don't see it happening. And one of the members of the G20, Argentina, actually had problems with that clause in the G20 declaration, and they half-heartedly signed the declaration, raising their opposition to the taxation of the global billionaires. As I think their president was saying, it's a socialist clause. So it's already raising problems within the G20 even before the arrival of Donald Trump. So what the arrival of Donald Trump will do is to kill that clause, really, because without the participation of the United States, a country which has more billionaires than any other country in the world, it really won't work, or its impact won't be felt as much as it would if the United States does participate. But I don't see that happening under Donald Trump. But all the same, I think it's a noble policy that will help tackle global inequalities and also promote, I think, the sustainable development goals.
Yeah, of course, Javier Milei, a different president when you talk about the global south, one who actually favors more the capitalistic approach with regards to that topic. Dr. Nkala, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's Dr. Sizo Nkala, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Up next, I'm speaking to Leonard Shapiro, so Discovery South Africa, of course, a well-known medical aid giant within the country, is hosting a seminar conference, and they've invited Israeli healthcare providers. I'm going to be speaking to the South African healthcare workers for Palestine and just why they're objecting to this. Of course, this is on the back of the current genocide that is happening in that part of the world. Do stay tuned.